"There's no time, do it now." The young Apache woman shouted, and the rancher did the unthinkable. The morning sun rose over the desert hills, casting a golden light across the ranch. The air was dry and still, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. Birds chirped in the distance, and the cattle in the pasture stirred lazily, chewing the last of the dew-covered grass. The rancher, a man in his 40s with weathered skin and calloused hands, moved through his morning routine as he had done for years. He fed the horses, checked the fences, and looked after the cattle with careful attention. His life had always been simple, predictable, and, above all, safe. But on this morning, everything changed. A sudden movement caught his eye near the entrance of the ranch. At first, he thought it was another neighbor or a traveler passing by, but as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a young woman. Her clothes were worn and dusty, her long dark hair tangled from travel. She was not a stranger to the land, but he had never seen her before. There was a strange urgency in her steps, a determination that seemed almost desperate. Her eyes were wide, full of fear and intensity, and they locked onto his as she approached. Before he could ask a single question, she spoke, her voice sharp and commanding. "There's no time, do it now," she shouted, her words cutting through the calm morning air. The rancher froze, unsure what she meant. He had lived in this area all his life, and he had learned to read the signs of the desert. Fires were dangerous, but they were also slow-moving at this time of year. Usually, there was time to plan, time to prepare, time to act. But the urgency in her voice told him that this was different. Something terrible was coming, and there was no time to waste. He stepped closer, squinting at the horizon. In the distance, he noticed a faint haze, almost like a shadow hovering above the hills. At first, he thought it was morning mist, but then a small flicker of orange appeared. He realized with growing alarm that it was fire. The wind was shifting, carrying the smoke toward the valley and the ranch. He could feel the heat on his face even from this distance. The young woman did not wait for him to react. She grabbed his arm, her grip firm yet gentle. "You have to move quickly," she said. "The fire is faster than you think. Your animals, your people, they won't make it if you wait." Her words struck a chord in him. He had always considered himself careful, cautious, someone who measured risks and weighed every option. But now, hesitation could mean disaster. He looked around his ranch, taking in the barns, the stables, the fields of crops, and the animals grazing in the pasture. Every part of this land was precious to him. He had inherited it from his father, and he had built it into a place of safety and livelihood. The thought of losing it, of losing the creatures he cared for, made his chest tighten. He had always known the desert could be harsh, but he had never imagined a threat like this, one that could arrive so suddenly, with such devastating force. The young woman seemed to sense his doubt. She stepped in front of him, blocking his view of the barn for just a moment, forcing him to look into her eyes. "You don't have a choice," she said firmly. "You can wait and lose everything, or you can act now and save what you can. The fire is coming, and it won't wait for anyone." Her voice was steady, unwavering, but there was a softness beneath it, a hint of fear that she tried to hide. The rancher felt a strange mixture of fear and admiration. He did not know this woman, yet she spoke with the authority of someone who had lived with danger all her life. He had grown up hearing stories of the Apache people who knew the land better than anyone, who understood its rhythms, its hidden paths, its dangers. And now one of them was standing here, offering guidance in a moment of crisis. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his thoughts. He had to make a decision, and there was no time to waste. Every second counted. He could hear the crackle of distant flames, faint at first, but growing louder as the wind carried the sound across the hills. The air was beginning to smell of smoke, sharp and acrid, and a sense of urgency settled over him like a heavy weight. Without another word, he moved to prepare. He called the ranch hands who were scattered across the property and explained the situation. Some were hesitant, their faces pale with fear. Fires could be unpredictable, deadly, and fast. But the rancher's voice was steady, and the presence of the young Apache woman gave them confidence. They began to gather the animals, guiding the cattle toward the safer pastures, securing the horses, and preparing wagons to move supplies if needed. As they worked, the rancher noticed the young woman moving with incredible speed and precision. She knew the land, the paths, the hidden areas where animals could be safe. She directed the ranch hands, showing them shortcuts through the desert and pointing out areas where the fire might spread faster. Her calm under pressure was remarkable, and it inspired the rancher to act with courage he did not know he had. The sun climbed higher and the fire grew closer. Smoke thickened in the air, turning the sky a dull orange. The heat became intense, even from a distance, and the rancher could feel the sting of smoke in his eyes. The animals were restless, sensing the danger, and it took all the ranch hands' strength to keep them calm and moving in the right direction. Time seemed to stretch and compress at once. Every action, every decision mattered. The rancher moved with a focus he had never experienced before. He could hear the young woman shouting directions, her voice cutting through the roar of the wind and the crackle of the fire. He realized that he was not alone, that he had help, guidance, and knowledge that he could rely on in this critical moment. As the fire approached the edge of the rancher made a final check. He looked over the barns, the pastures, the pens, and the fences. Everything possible had been done to protect the animals and the property, but he knew the fire was relentless, unpredictable, and that not everything could be saved. Yet, in that moment, he also realized that courage was not about certainty. It was about action, about making the choice to face danger and do what needed to be done, no matter how frightening it was. The young woman turned to him, her eyes meeting his once more. "It's coming," she said softly but with conviction. "You have to move forward, now." He nodded, swallowing his fear. He mounted his horse, feeling the familiar rhythm beneath him, and followed her toward the first line of danger. The wind carried sparks across the dry grass, and the sound of crackling flames grew louder. But the rancher felt a strange calm, a determination that steadied his nerves. He was ready to do what was necessary, to act in the face of danger, and to protect what mattered most. As they rode together toward the advancing fire, the rancher understood something profound. Life was unpredictable, fragile, and fleeting, but courage, action, and trust could make a difference. And in that moment, he chose to trust, to act, and to face the unthinkable with resolve. The morning light continued to shine, casting long shadows over the ranch. Smoke rose in the distance, but so did hope, as the rancher and the young Apache woman moved forward together, ready to confront the challenge that lay ahead. The fire was closer now, its orange and red flames dancing along the ridges of the hills. Smoke thickened the air, making it hard to breathe and stinging the eyes. The rancher and the young Apache woman rode quickly across the desert, the wind carrying the smoke toward them. Each step of the horse felt urgent, almost alive with the rhythm of survival. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear the distant roar of the flames, the crackle of burning wood, and the occasional pop as a tree or a dry bush ignited. He realized that hesitation was no longer an option. Every second counted. The young woman glanced back at him. "Stay close," she shouted, her voice sharp against the wind. "The fire moves fast here, but there are safer paths if you follow me." She urged her horse forward, moving with a confidence born of knowing the land intimately. The rancher had never seen anyone navigate the desert like this. She seemed to anticipate the fire's every move, taking routes that avoided the thickest smoke and the strongest flames. As they moved through the hills, the rancher noticed the smoke beginning to twist and rise in columns. The wind was changing direction, unpredictable and wild. He remembered stories he had heard as a child about fires in the desert, how they could shift in an instant, devouring everything in their path. The reality of it now was terrifying. He could feel the heat on his skin, intense and unforgiving, yet he pressed on. The young woman's steady presence gave him courage. The two of them reached a narrow canyon that wound through the hills. The path was treacherous, rocky, and uneven, but it offered some protection from the worst of the fire. She led the way, carefully guiding the rancher and the horses along the safest spots. Sparks flew around them, landing on dry grass and igniting small flames, but they moved fast enough to avoid being trapped. "Look there," she said, pointing to a group of frightened cattle trapped near a broken fence. Their low moans and nervous stamping filled the air. The rancher's stomach tightened. He could not leave them. He spurred his horse forward, following the young woman as she quickly cut open the fence, creating a passage for the animals to escape. One by one, the cattle ran past, guided by the rancher and the young woman, their hooves kicking up dust and dirt. It was exhausting work. The rancher felt sweat running down his back, mixed with the grime of dust and ash. His arms ached from holding the reins tightly, and his lungs burned from the thick smoke. Yet he could not stop. Every moment spent hesitating could mean the difference between life and death for the animals and anyone who might be caught in the fire. They moved on, leaving the cattle safely in a small valley where the fire had not yet reached. The young woman rode ahead, scanning the landscape for other dangers. She pointed to another group of horses trapped near a ridge, their panic evident. "We have to act quickly," she said. "If the fire reaches them, they won't make it." The rancher nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had always been careful, always considered risks, but now there was no room for doubt. He guided the horses toward the trapped animals, moving them into safety with careful, practiced gestures. The wind carried the scent of smoke, strong and suffocating, and every breath was a struggle. But the work had to be done. There was no other choice. As they continued, the fire began to spread across the hills faster than the rancher expected. He realized that the wind had shifted again, pushing flames toward a nearby farm. The thought of the fire destroying someone else's home, their livestock, and their memories filled him with urgency. He looked at the young woman, whose eyes were sharp and focused. "We have to warn them," she said. "Come with me." They galloped toward the neighboring farm, navigating through the rising smoke and the uneven terrain. The rancher felt the ground shaking under the horses' hooves, the heat growing more intense with every step. Sparks flew past them, and a nearby tree ignited in a flash of fire. The sound was deafening, but the young woman remained calm, guiding the rancher with gestures and clear instructions. When they reached the farm, the rancher saw the family trying to corral their animals, panic etched on their faces. "Quick!" the young woman shouted. "Follow us." "There's a safe path through the canyon." The family hurried, following the rancher and the young woman as they led the animals to safety. It was chaotic, frightening, and exhausting, but their quick thinking saved countless lives. By midday, the fire had grown to a massive wall of orange and red, devouring everything in its path. The smoke made it difficult to see, and the heat was almost unbearable. Yet the rancher felt a strange sense of clarity. Fear was still there, but it was accompanied by determination. He understood now that courage was not the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. The young woman paused for a moment, her horse breathing heavily. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "There are still animals trapped in the valley below. We have to reach them before it's too late." The rancher nodded. He felt his muscles ache, his lungs burn, and his heart race, but he followed her without hesitation. They descended into the valley, the fire now roaring in the hills behind them. The landscape was chaotic, fallen trees, scorched earth, and smoke that made it hard to breathe. Yet in the midst of danger, the rancher noticed the small signs of life. A frightened calf hiding behind a bush, a horse tangled in fencing, a flock of sheep huddled together. Every life mattered. Every choice mattered. They worked tirelessly, freeing the trapped animals and guiding them to safer areas. The ranch hands, inspired by the young woman's courage and the rancher's determination, moved quickly, following instructions and acting without hesitation. The fire was relentless, but together they created a path to safety, moving animals and people alike to areas where the flames could not reach. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the fire had reached its peak, spreading across the hills like a living thing. The smoke turned the sky a deep orange, and the air was thick and heavy. The rancher's face was covered in soot and sweat, his hands raw from gripping the reins and helping animals, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. They had saved many lives today, and that knowledge kept him moving forward despite exhaustion. The young woman looked at him, her eyes filled with pride and relief. "You've done well," she said softly, "but there's still more to do. The fire is not finished yet, and we have to be ready for whatever comes next." The rancher nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had faced fear, acted decisively, and saved lives, but the fire was a powerful force, one that required vigilance and courage at every step. He realized that the day was far from over and that the challenges ahead would test him even more. As night began to fall, the fire's glow lit the sky, casting long shadows over the desert. The rancher and the young woman paused for a moment, catching their breath and tending to the animals they had saved. The heat of the day had not faded, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the danger they had faced. Yet, in the midst of exhaustion and fear, there was a sense of hope. They had acted together, trusted one another, and made choices that mattered. The rancher realized that bravery was not just about facing danger, it was about acting with purpose, using knowledge and working together to protect life. The young woman turned to him once more. "Tomorrow will be harder," she said, her voice calm but serious. "The fire is not done and there will be more decisions to make, but for now rest, you've earned it." The rancher nodded, feeling the weight of the day settle on his shoulders. He knew she was right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that he was ready. With the young woman's guidance, the courage of his team, and his own determination, he could face whatever came next. The night descended over the desert, bringing with it a fragile calm. The fire still burned in the distance, a reminder of the dangers that remained. But for now, the rancher allowed himself a moment of relief. He had acted when it mattered most, saved lives, and begun to understand the true meaning of courage. And as he looked at the young Apache woman by his side, he realized that sometimes help and guidance come from the most unexpected places, and that together, even the most overwhelming challenges can be faced with hope, determination, and courage. The night brought little relief. Although the fire had temporarily slowed with the fading sunlight, the heat from the scorched hills lingered, and the smoke hung thick in the air. The rancher could barely sleep, his mind replaying the events of the day, the animals they had saved, the paths they had taken, the narrow escapes. Every sound outside, the distant crackle of fire, the shifting of horses, the rustle of the wind through the brush, kept him alert. He realized that courage was not just about action in the moment. It was about readiness, even when exhaustion pulled at him. The young Apache woman stayed close by, tending to the horses and checking the small camp they had made near a shaded canyon. She moved with quiet efficiency, preparing water for the animals, untangling ropes, and ensuring that everything was ready for the challenges that awaited them at sunrise. The rancher watched her work, realizing that her strength was not only physical but mental. She had lived with the desert, with its dangers, its storms, and its fires, and she understood how to survive when the world seemed against her. Morning came slowly. The first rays of sun revealed a landscape marked by fire's destruction, blackened earth, fallen trees, and smoldering embers that still glowed faintly among the dry brush. The rancher and the young woman mounted their horses, moving cautiously through the valley. They had a plan. The fire had spread overnight, and there were still animals trapped in smaller canyons, too narrow for humans to navigate quickly without guidance. Every moment they delayed could mean disaster. The first challenge appeared almost immediately. A group of frightened horses had been cornered near a cliff edge. They stamped their hooves and neighed in panic, eyes wide with fear. The rancher could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him. One wrong move, and they could plummet down the rocks or run straight into the advancing flames. The young woman signaled for him to stay back while she approached the animals. Her movements were calm, deliberate, almost hypnotic. She spoke softly to the horses, guiding them step by step to safer ground. The rancher watched in awe. Her knowledge of animal behavior, combined with her deep understanding of the land, made her almost seem magical. Once the horses were safe, they moved on to a small herd of cattle trapped in a narrow canyon. The fire had blocked their usual escape routes, and smoke made it difficult for the animals to see. The rancher rode alongside them, urging the cattle toward the narrow path the young woman had identified. Sparks flew around them, igniting dry grass along the edges, but they moved quickly, careful to avoid the worst of the flames. Every action required precision and courage. Every second counted. As they worked, the rancher's mind wandered briefly to the people who might be living nearby. Fires in the desert did not only threaten animals, they threatened homes, families, and memories. He knew that beyond saving the ranch's livestock, they had a responsibility to warn neighbors and help where they could. The young woman had already anticipated this. "We will check the nearby farms," she said. "But first, we must focus on the animals that have no way to escape on their own." Hours passed. The sun climbed high and the heat became almost unbearable. Sweat ran down the rancher's back, mixed with soot from the smoke. His hands ached from gripping the reins and helping animals, but he refused to stop. He could not. Every animal saved was a victory. Every successful maneuver through the fire was proof that action, even in the face of danger, mattered. By mid-afternoon, they reached a particularly treacherous part of the canyon. Here, the fire had created a wall on one side, while smoke and falling debris made movement difficult on the other. Several horses had become trapped, their fear palpable. The young woman turned to the rancher. "This is the moment," she said quietly but firmly. "We have to take a risk. There is no other way to reach them safely." The rancher nodded. He felt fear spike through him, sharp and immediate, but he also felt determination. He had faced danger before today, but nothing like this. Every decision could be the difference between life and death. He followed the young woman's lead as they guided the horses toward a narrow ledge above the flames. Sparks flew past them, embers landing dangerously close, but they moved with careful precision. Step by step, they reached a safer spot, and the trapped animals followed, guided by the calm authority of the young woman and the rancher's steady hand. As they caught their breath, the young woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting the determination of someone who had faced fire and danger countless times. "There is more," she said, "but you are learning. Courage is not just about facing fear. It is about thinking, planning, and acting when others would run." The rancher nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that bravery was not only physical, it was mental and emotional. It required trust, both in oneself and in others. And in this moment, he trusted the young woman completely. Together, they could face challenges that would have seemed impossible alone. The next hours were a blur of action and careful decisions. They navigated through narrow canyons, guiding frightened cattle and horses away from flames that threatened to block their path. At times, the fire seemed unstoppable, moving faster than they could predict, forcing them to change routes on the fly. Each decision was tense, with no margin for error. The rancher learned quickly, following the young woman's lead, observing her techniques, and making split-second choices that kept them and the animals alive. At one point, they reached a small herd of sheep trapped near a cliff edge. The animals were panicked, unable to move toward safety. The rancher dismounted, working alongside the young woman to guide the sheep one by one along a narrow path. Smoke filled the air, making it difficult to breathe, and the heat from nearby flames pressed against them. Yet they continued, step by step, determined not to leave a single animal behind. As the day wore on, exhaustion began to set in. The rancher's muscles ached, his lungs burned, and the sun beat down relentlessly. But every time he looked at the young woman, he saw unwavering focus, energy, and courage. Her presence reminded him that even in the most dangerous situations, determination could overcome fear. By late afternoon, the fire had begun to spread across a wider area. The wind shifted unpredictably, and smoke made it nearly impossible to see. The rancher realized that they had to act quickly to save a group of animals trapped in the open plains. The young woman signaled for him to follow her, leading them through a narrow path that avoided the worst of the flames. Step by step, they guided the animals toward safety, racing against time as the fire advanced behind them. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they reached a relatively safe area. The animals were exhausted but alive. The rancher dismounted, leaning heavily against his horse, feeling the relief of survival mixed with the exhaustion of the day. He looked at the young woman who stood beside him, calm yet alert, ready for the next challenge. "We have done well," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had faced danger and succeeded. "But there is still more work to do. The fire is not finished, and tomorrow will bring new challenges." The rancher nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He felt a deep respect for her knowledge, her courage, and her unwavering focus. She had guided him through dangers he had never imagined, teaching him lessons about bravery, trust, and the importance of decisive action. As night fell over the desert, the fire's glow lit the sky, painting it in shades of orange and red. The smoke thickened, carrying the scent of burning earth and dry brush. The rancher felt the weight of the day settle on his shoulders, but he also felt a sense of accomplishment. They had saved countless animals, guided people to safety, and survived challenges that would have seemed insurmountable. Sitting by the small campfire they had made, the rancher and the young woman tended to the animals, providing water and checking for injuries. They worked quietly, their actions efficient and purposeful. The rancher realized that courage was not only in the bold moments of action, but also in the quiet, persistent care that followed. As he watched the fire in the distance, he understood something profound. Fear was natural, unavoidable even. But courage, trust, and determination could transform fear into action. And in this moment, with the young woman at his side, he knew that they could face whatever the fire, or life, threw at them next. The night was long, but for the first time, the rancher felt a connection not only to the land and the animals, but also to the people who lived and worked alongside him. The young Apache woman had taught him that strength came from knowledge, patience, and trust. And as he drifted into a brief, fitful sleep, he knew that tomorrow would be another test, but one he was ready to face with courage, determination, and hope. The fire had grown to an almost unstoppable force. By mid-morning, it had spread across the hills and valleys, leaving trails of blackened earth and glowing embers in its path. The air was thick with smoke, making it difficult to breathe, and the heat pressed down relentlessly. The rancher knew that every second mattered. The animals they had saved were still scattered across the valley, and some were trapped in areas where the fire had blocked their usual escape routes. The young Apache woman had already scouted the land, identifying safe paths and planning the quickest routes to get the remaining animals out. The rancher's heart pounded as he realized the challenge before them. The fire moved unpredictably, driven by the wind, and the terrain was treacherous. Every step could be fatal if misjudged. Yet he also felt a strange sense of resolve. He had faced danger before, but today required something more than courage. It required bold, decisive action. He looked at the young woman, whose eyes were sharp and focused, and knew he could trust her completely. Together, they could navigate the fire and save as many lives as possible. The first task was to reach a group of cattle trapped on a ridge with flames closing in from both sides. The rancher could see the panic in their eyes as they stamped and neighed, unsure where to go. The young woman rode ahead, guiding the cattle with calm authority, her voice cutting through the roar of the fire. She moved with confidence, leading them toward a narrow canyon that offered shelter. The rancher followed, urging the animals gently but firmly. Sparks flew dangerously close, landing on dry grass and igniting small fires, but they moved quickly enough to avoid disaster. Once the cattle were safe, the rancher noticed a group of horses trapped on a nearby hill. The fire had created a wall behind them, and smoke made it difficult for the animals to see. The young woman turned to him, her expression serious. "We have to take a risk," she said. "There is no other way to reach them before the fire spreads further. We must act now." Fear surged through the rancher. The risk was enormous. One wrong step, one misjudged movement, and they could all be caught in the flames. But he also knew that hesitation could mean certain death for the trapped horses. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and nodded. "Let's do it," he said. They rode carefully along a narrow ledge, guiding the horses step by step toward safety. The flames crackled around them, the heat intense enough to stink their skin. Smoke filled their lungs, making every breath a struggle. Yet they pressed on, each movement deliberate, each choice calculated. The young woman's knowledge of the land was invaluable, and the rancher relied on her guidance, learning to move with precision and patience. As they reached the top of the hill, the rancher realized the fire was spreading faster than he had imagined. A sudden gust of wind pushed the flames toward a nearby canyon where more animals were trapped. The young woman signaled for him to follow her, and they raced against time. Their horses galloped through the narrow paths, avoiding falling embers and debris. The ground shook beneath them as small rocks and branches tumbled down the slopes, but they kept moving, focused on the goal ahead. They arrived at the canyon just as the fire reached the edge. Sheep and goats were trapped, bleeding in panic, unsure where to run. The rancher dismounted, guiding the animals by hand with careful, steady movements. The young woman moved among them, her calm voice soothing the terrified creatures. Sparks flew dangerously close, but they worked quickly, guiding the animals to safety one by one. Each successful rescue was a small victory, giving them the energy to continue despite exhaustion and fear. By mid-afternoon, the heat was unbearable. The fire had spread across the valley, and the smoke made it almost impossible to see. The rancher's arms ached, his lungs burned, and sweat dripped down his face, but he refused to stop. The animals still needed him, and he could not abandon them. He realized that bravery was not the absence of fear, it was acting despite it, and he had never felt courage so intensely. The young woman rode up to him, pointing toward a distant ridge. "There is a group of cattle trapped there," she said. "The path is dangerous, but we must try. If we hesitate, they will not survive." The rancher nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The path was narrow, with fire on one side and steep cliffs on the other. One misstep could be fatal, but he also knew that inaction was not an option. They guided the horses and cattle along the treacherous ridge, moving slowly and carefully. Sparks landed around them, igniting dry grass that they had to stomp out quickly to prevent the fire from spreading. The wind shifted unpredictably, pushing the flames closer, but they pressed on, focused on the goal. Step by step, they moved the animals to safer ground, their determination unwavering. At one point, the rancher noticed that a small calf had fallen behind, too frightened to continue. Without hesitation, he dismounted and ran toward it, his hands reaching out to guide it back to safety. Smoke filled his lungs and the heat burned his skin, but he refused to give up. The young woman followed closely, helping him guide the calf along the narrow path. Together, they succeeded, and the calf joined the others in the safety of the canyon below. The day wore on, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The fire had consumed vast areas of land, leaving behind blackened earth and glowing embers. Yet despite the destruction, the rancher felt a sense of accomplishment. They had saved countless animals, guided them through the fire, and survived dangers that would have seemed impossible just hours before. The young woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting pride and relief. "You have done well," she said, "but the fire is not finished, and there will be more challenges tomorrow. We must be ready for whatever comes next." The rancher nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had learned valuable lessons about courage, trust, and the importance of decisive action. As night fell over the desert, the fire's glow lit the sky in shades of red and orange. The air was thick with smoke, and the heat lingered despite the fading sunlight. The rancher and the young woman set up a small camp near a shaded canyon, tending to the animals and resting briefly before the challenges of the next day. The rancher felt exhausted, but also alive in a way he had never experienced. He had faced fear, acted decisively, and saved lives. In the quiet moments, he reflected on the events of the day. The young woman had taught him that courage was not just about facing danger. It was about knowledge, planning, and acting when others would hesitate. She had guided him through situations he had never imagined, helping him make choices that saved lives. He realized that true bravery came from working together, trusting others, and facing the unthinkable with determination. The night was long, but for the first time, the rancher felt a deep connection to the land, the animals, and the people who lived and worked alongside him. The young woman had shown him the strength that came from understanding the land, respecting its dangers, and acting decisively when the moment demanded it. As he drifted into a brief, fitful sleep, the rancher knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The fire was far from finished, and the risks would only increase. Yet he felt ready. He had learned the value of courage, the power of trust, and the importance of decisive action. And with the young woman by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next together. The next morning dawned with a tense stillness. The fire was still burning across the hills, but the wind had shifted in their favor, giving the rancher and the young Apache woman a small window to act. The smoke still hung in the air, thick and suffocating, but there was a glimmer of hope. After days of battling fear, heat, and exhaustion, they had learned to read the fire, to anticipate its movements, and to make quick, decisive choices. Today, they would face their greatest challenge yet. The rancher mounted his horse, feeling the weight of the past days pressing on him. His arms ached, his lungs still burned from smoke, and fatigue clung to every muscle in his body. Yet he felt alive, alert, and determined. He had learned the power of courage under pressure, of trusting someone with knowledge greater than his own, and of making bold decisions in the face of fear. The young Apache woman rode beside him, calm and steady as always, her eyes scanning the horizon for danger. Their first task was to rescue a group of livestock trapped near a cliff edge. The fire had cut off their usual escape route, and smoke made it almost impossible for the animals to see. The rancher could hear the low bleating of sheep and the frantic stamping of cattle, and he knew that hesitation would cost lives. Together, they guided the animals along a narrow, winding path that led to a safer area. Sparks fell dangerously close, landing on dry grass and igniting small flames, but they pressed forward step by step, until every animal was safely on the other side. Once the immediate danger was past, they rode toward the open plains, where a herd of horses was trapped. The rancher felt a surge of responsibility. Every animal, every life they saved, was a testament to their courage and determination. The young woman led the way, signaling for him to follow her path through the safest routes, avoiding the thickest smoke and the most intense flames. As they approached the herd, They realized the challenge was greater than expected. The horses were panicked, running in circles, unsure where to go. The fire had crept closer, and there was no time to hesitate. The rancher dismounted and moved among the animals, his hands steady as he guided them, soothing their fear with calm words and gentle gestures. The young woman assisted him, her knowledge of animal behavior and the land proving invaluable. Together, they moved the herd toward a narrow canyon that offered shelter from the advancing flames. The heat was intense, and smoke filled their lungs, but they refused to stop. Every step was a struggle, but each successful rescue strengthened their resolve. They had become a team, moving with synchronicity and trust, anticipating each other's actions and supporting one another through every obstacle. As they guided the last of the horses into safety, the rancher noticed a calf trapped near a fallen tree. The fire had already ignited dry grass around it, and the animal was too frightened to move. Without hesitation, he ran toward it, shielding it from the flames and guiding it along the safest path. The young woman followed closely, helping him navigate the treacherous terrain. Step by step, they led the calf to safety, their determination unwavering despite exhaustion. With the immediate danger addressed, the rancher and the young woman paused for a moment, catching their breath and tending to the animals. The sun was high and the heat oppressive, but the fire had slowed in some areas, giving them a chance to regroup. They drank water, checked the animals for injuries, and prepared for the next stage of their efforts. The rancher reflected on the past days, the fear, the uncertainty, the adrenaline, and the courage required to face each new challenge. He realized that bravery was not just about facing danger. It was about making decisions when the stakes were highest, about trusting others, and about acting decisively to protect life. The young woman had taught him lessons that went beyond survival, lessons about courage, patience, and determination. Their final challenge lay ahead, guiding the remaining animals and any stragglers from nearby farms through a narrow canyon to safety. The fire had created a natural barrier, and the path was treacherous, with steep cliffs on one side and flames on the other. The wind was unpredictable and smoke filled the air, making it difficult to see. Yet they had no choice. Every life depended on their actions. They moved carefully through the canyon, step by step, guiding animals and checking for stragglers. Sparks ignited dry grass around them, and the heat was almost unbearable, but they pressed forward. The rancher's hands were blistered, his arms sore, and his lungs burned, yet he did not falter. The young woman moved alongside him, calm and precise, her voice guiding both animals and humans alike. At one point, they reached a small group of sheep trapped near a ledge. The animals were panicked, their fear palpable. The rancher dismounted, moving slowly among them, guiding them with gentle words and steady hands. The young woman assisted him, her presence providing reassurance and guidance. Step by step, they led the sheep to safety, one by one, until the entire group was out of danger. The day was long, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the burned landscape. Yet, despite exhaustion, fear, and the relentless heat, the rancher felt a sense of triumph. They had saved countless animals, guided people to safety, and survived challenges that would have seemed insurmountable just days before. As the fire began to settle in the distance, the young woman turned to the rancher. "We have done what we can," she said softly, her voice carrying relief and pride. "The fire is not gone, but the animals and people are safe. You have shown courage and determination beyond what many could manage." The rancher nodded, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. He realized that bravery was not about acting alone. It was about teamwork, trust, and taking responsibility when it mattered most. In the aftermath, the rancher and the young woman helped neighbors assess the damage and check on remaining animals. Some property had been lost, but thanks to their quick thinking and decisive action, the losses were far less than they could have been. The community began to understand the courage required to face such danger, and the value of knowledge, experience, and trust in those who guide others through crises. The rancher, once a man of careful habits and cautious thinking, had been transformed. He had faced unimaginable challenges, made split-second decisions, and saved lives. The young woman's guidance had shown him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Their partnership had created a bond of trust, respect, and mutual understanding that would last a lifetime. As night fell over the desert, the fire's glow lit the sky in shades of red and orange, reflecting on the scorched hills and the blackened earth. The rancher sat by a small fire with the young woman, tending to the animals they had saved. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of shared experience and achievement. The rancher reflected on the lessons of the past days. That life was fragile and unpredictable, that courage required both action and trust, and that even in the face of fear, determination could create hope. The young woman had not only guided him through the fire, but had also taught him the value of patience, observation, and decisive action. In the days that followed, the rancher continued to work with the young woman and the community to recover from the fire. They rebuilt fences, checked on livestock, and ensured that everyone had what they needed. The experience had forged a new respect between the rancher and the young woman, and between the rancher and his neighbors. The fire had tested them all, but it had also revealed the strength, courage, and resilience that lay within them. The phrase, "there's no time, do it now," became more than just words. It became a symbol of action, courage, and the importance of decisive choices. The rancher carried it in his heart as a reminder that in moments of crisis, hesitation could be fatal, and action could save lives. Looking back on the experience, the rancher understood that the fire had changed him. He was no longer just a cautious man managing a ranch. He was someone who had faced danger, acted decisively, and helped protect life when it mattered most. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it. The young woman remained a constant presence, her guidance and knowledge invaluable. Together, they had faced the unthinkable and come through stronger. The bond they had formed went beyond words, a shared respect, trust, and understanding born from shared danger and triumph. As the sun rose over the desert hills in the days that followed, the rancher looked out over the land he loved. The scars of the fire were visible, but so were the signs of resilience. The animals thriving in safe pastures, the land slowly recovering, and the community working together to rebuild. The lessons of courage, trust, and decisive action remained, a lasting legacy of the fire they had survived together. And as the rancher watched the young Apache woman ride across the plains, guiding the remaining animals to safety, he knew that he would never forget the lessons she had taught him, the courage they had shared, and the unbreakable bond that had formed in the heart of danger.